Hey guys, here's my custom Crosman 2240, and it's not just custom on the outside. I did some internal work today, and the first section I want to show you is slicking up the hammer and the sear so that when you're cocking your pistol it isn't so much effort and it doesn't feel so gritty. Still going to have that springy sound because you're pulling a spring back, but you want it to be as easy as possible. Plus you want the hammer to fly forward as nice as possible. So let's take a look at how to modify the hammer. Hey guys, RW here. I had a few long days in the shop and my hands are feeling it, man. This is a lot of work with the hands. They're sore. But what I'm looking at here is the brand new 2240. And just like anything you get, you know, there's going to always be what I call factory tolerances, where things are not always optimized because they're building these as fast as they can to sell them. And so optimization is really up to the modder. And that's what's so fun about the 2240 is there's so much you can do for it. But I'm not going to spin off on all the mods you can do. What I'm going to look at today is what I can do to optimize this gun without buying anything. Like for instance, right now when I crank back the bolt, it's crusty feeling. I can feel a very, like it's almost like it's hard right there and then it gets a little easier, but it's not easy at all cranking that back. And so I'm thinking there's got to be something going on in here that I can optimize so that the hammer is not causing so much resistance. And that would probably also increase the force of the hammer strike if I could ease it up a little bit. So checking that out, I'm going to get inside this thing and look at it, and I'll show you guys what I find, and we'll see if we can improve the cocking action on this, which is a big deal because you're going to be cocking every time you take a shot. So if it's rough, crusty and hard to pull back, that's going to wear you out, and plus you're going to lose power on each hammer fall. So let's open this baby up. Let's take a look at it and see what's going on with it. Hey guys, so the gun comes apart pretty easy. There's two screws that take the grip frame off. And I wanted to point out something that if you guys have never taken one of these apart before, you'll see this tiny little spring sticking up right there where my thumb is. And there, underneath it is a tiny, even tinier ball bearing. And what you want to avoid doing is losing either one of those very, very tiny parts. The little tiny ball bearing cost you about $4 to replace. So I wanted to show you what I think is the source of the drag. Okay. Now this part of the sear is actually pretty smooth, and this is what stops the hammer's forward motion after you've cocked it. Now what's causing all the drag is what seems to me is to be an excessively sharp edge. I don't understand why this edge has to be sharp. This doesn't hold back anything. The hammer is moving this way, and what it wants to do is get by. So you pull the trigger, the sear drops, the hammer goes by. Now you've got to pull the bolt and hammer gets pulled back, which I'll show you how that works. There's a little hammer in here, like I said, it's like a piston or a puck, and it slides back and forth, and when you cock the bolt it pulls it back. And what's it pulling it back past? It's pulling it back past the sear. Okay, I wish my camera would cooperate here. So here's the deal. Okay, you see the little, if my camera would just do its job, that'd be so awesome. There's a little scratch mark right there. That's from that extremely sharp edge, which I don't know why that has to be sharp. I don't know why that can't be rounded. If it were rounded, when you're pulling back, there'd be a lot less resistance. It would just ride right over that, and then the face would snap in. Because the sharp 90-degree edge is in front of what's actually catching the hammer. The hammer is being pushed forward against that. You pull the trigger, it goes past. Now you want to cock the gun. You've got to pull past this almost sharp bird edge there. So I think by easing this edge right here, and getting that polished up, and getting the top surface of this polished up, and maybe even putting a little rounding on the edges to reduce the amount of friction, will ease the bolt pull. So let's start with one thing at a time. That's what we'll do. By the way, this is the spring and the cap, and you take off the bottom screw that holds the grip panel, and you take off this top screw that holds the sight, and it comes right off the back of the gun. Not a lot of force on it. The hammer spring is extremely soft. It's a very soft spring. Okay, so not a lot of force on that. So we'll take a look at this. I'm going to start off just by working on this without changing anything else, see what it feels like, and then we'll take it from there. So we'll kind of give it kind of a scientific approach here, one step at a time, test it. Okay, so let's take a good look at the Sear. Now what I did was I just dragged this across my 220 sanding block just a couple times to show you how high that is. This is the part that drags across the hammer puck when you're cocking the gun. So if this is as smooth as possible, that's going to help, right? And this is the front of it, the part that's going past it. So easing that little edge right there is definitely going to do something, huh? This surface here is the surface that contacts the hammer. And again, I just dragged it a couple times across my sanding block just to highlight it. You can see that that also is not nice and flat and smooth. So the more perfect this surface is, and this surface is, these three surfaces are critical. This is the part that the trigger pushes against. Now I'm not going to get into that part yet, because there's other parts I think that can be improved on the gun, but we'll just do one step at a time. Right now I'm just going to work on straightening and truing the Sear, and then I'm going to go from 220 on up to 600 and get that just right and get it nice. Okay? I wanted to show you something that you may need to know, since this is kind of to show you guys how to tune up a gun for free, is when you're doing little parts like this that have to be perfectly perpendicular or something. Here's a perpendicular little oak block that's nice and hard. And what I do is I hold my piece there. One hand pinches the piece, the other hand gives a slight downward pressure on the piece. My block is held here so it won't slide, and I just pull it towards me, drag it. And let's see if I can capture this action for you so you can see. The idea is you can get everything to stay exactly. You don't want to change the profile. What you're trying to do is get rid of the flash or the miss mark from the stamping. So you just make gentle progress. You don't try to do it all at once. You just make a couple of drags like this, and then you check your work and you see, have I gotten rid of the flash yet? Now you can still see it's two levels. When that's shiny all the way across, then I'm done. And then I can just give it a light polish, so that and what happens is the Sear drops down this way and the hammer slides this way. So you don't want to change the angle of this. You just want to make it, and you want it to be flat so that it'll stop the hammer. Okay. Now this up here isn't as critical, and neither is this, but this, since this is actually what's keeping the gun safe, keeping the hammer held back until you pull the trigger, you don't want to do something to this where you bump the gun and all of a sudden it shoots a pellet in your foot or something, okay? So all I've really done here is polish and ease the edge of the top of that. So now it's smoother, so there'll be less drag. And I did the same to the leading edge of it. It's difficult to point out. I didn't want to change the profile of it. See, so I've got a, wait for it to do its thing, if ever. Anyway, I changed the profile not at all. Okay, I want the exact same profile on the Sear, but all I did was make it extremely smooth so there's no sharp edges. And let's see what that does, okay? And where the Sear goes in the gun is right in here. Come on, camera. I'm going to have to shoot this camera pretty soon. Sear goes like this. Okay. And there's a little spring that holds the Sear up against the hammer. And all the trigger does, there's a trigger pin with a little, what's it? Okay. Sorry, didn't mean to be out of frame there. But the little warpy washer and the pin. Okay. For the trigger, the whole part of the warpy washer is to push it up against the other side so that it doesn't wiggle, which is a pretty half-assed way to do it. So you can see that there is a rounded part of the trigger so that when the trigger comes up, it's pushing against the Sear right there. And this releases the Sear, which is held up by a spring right here, lets the hammer fly forward. So obviously you don't want to change this profile, but for the cocking mechanism you would want to change this profile. So without changing anything else, we'll test it out and I'll see what it's like. And just from this one little bit of area of polishing, let's see if it's made any difference at all. And then we'll go deeper. Alright, so here's the gun back together. And let's just see if you guys can hear any difference. Hear that dragging sound? It's still making a dragging sound. But it's not as much, it's not as crusty, but there's still something dragging. And you can hear the hammer click up real nice. It engages real nice. Okay, and here let's see how it lets off. Oops, there we go. Nice crisp let off. So nothing's changed really there. Really very little play in the trigger. Just a little bit of play in the trigger, but not much. So shoots fine, cocks fine. Not as nice as I want though. You can hear the crustiness. Right in there is where it wants to bind up, and then finally it pulls back. So the next step will be to take the breech off, look inside this whole tube, and see if there's anything in the tube that might be making that crustiness. Let's see what we can do before I do anything else to the Sear or triggers, okay? Trigger parts, I mean. Okay. So this is the state of disassembly to really be testing this part. And what we're looking at is the cocking force, and to listen to it, and to look at it, and to see what it's doing. Okay, so as you pull it back, I'm hearing some dragging sounds up here. That's from the force of this spring pushing the sear, which is pushing the piston, which is pushing it up against this part of the tube. So at this point, when you're cocking back, the tube and the piston, the hammer piston thing, are dragging. Okay, and the way I can demonstrate the difference is that if you take the spring out and you just slide this back and forth, there's no sound at all. The inside of the tube is pretty smooth and it's lubed up. I didn't see any burrs or flashing. Okay. And the way you remove the hammer is easy enough. You pull it back to this opening and you take out the pen, which I have to actually look at it because I'm just looking through the camera. The hammer drops out. Okay, so now let's look at the hammer. Okay, there's going to be two areas of wear. There's going to be, if my camera will cooperate. It's pissing me off. I'm really getting sick of this camera. Okay, there's going to be, on the opposite of from the hammer, you're going to see that little shiny mark on the ramp part of it. See that little mark right there? That is from the sear. That's the sear dragging on it, which is not that big a deal. However, up here, I'm seeing little light marks. I don't know if you guys can see them. The camera just won't do the right thing. So, Jesus. Freaking hate my camera. I'm trying to show you guys some macro stuff here. So the area that's going to be dragging, okay, is this area. So obviously as smooth as this stuff can be, especially on the top of the hammer, it's going to make it fly forward better, drag back better, everything. You can see it's just roughly milled. Right, let's go back. If I get it at the right angle. See the little white mark on it? That's from the sear. I don't think that's a big deal. I think the main drag is from all the milling marks on this hammer. So how could you go wrong by totally polishing this thing and making it slick as snot? I really don't see how you could go wrong. And I'm not too worried about the face of it, but this leading edge is what's dragging. I bet you that area right there is probably the #1 area that's dragging on the inside of the tube, because it's being lifted up at a slight angle by the sear pressure of the spring, which is going to put this in contact with the barrel of the tube, CO2 tube. So as smooth as possible on this, and this isn't going to have any effect on the safety of the gun. You could smooth the crap out of this because the hammer is trapping it on this side, opposite from the hole. See what I'm saying? So don't change this profile. That's where the sear. So about 15 minutes of sanding, a few minutes of polishing on the buffing wheel. This is the hammer now. And the area I was real interested in was making this area right here super smooth, because I think that's where the drag is. So I'm going to put it back together and cycle it a few times, see if it feels any different. Okay, so I think I can say without a doubt that this is a gigantic improvement on the gun. So I can operate this one-handed here just for you. There it's fired. Okay. Now this is before it was dragging and making all kinds of noise, and it was very difficult to pull back. You can still hear that little drag. I'm touching the gun to the table to amplify the noise for you guys. Okay. Here. Still feel a little drag. It's lubed up inside like it's supposed to be. Much, much better. And when it's not touching the table, you hardly hear it at all. Just a little. And what that noise is the hammer dragging on the top of this tube. Okay, so I would say one thing to do for sure if you want to improve at least the ease of cocking the gun is to polish the sear, true it up, polish it, and then polish out the hammer. It makes it slide back and forth real nice. Let's see if we can take a look and see if there's any visible drag marks on it. Yep, see that little scuff mark right there? That's where it's rubbing the tube. Right there. It rubs it across this flat right there. So the smoother that is, the better the hammer is going to cock back. I'm not seeing any marks where the sear drags, so I don't think I have to do anything else to the sear as far as the way the sear contacts the hammer. So the main amount of drag is going to be up in this tube, so make sure that this is clean. Use some air gun oil and polish this baby up, and you'll lose a lot of the effort involved in cocking the gun. Okay guys, gun's back together and feels pretty smooth. Hammer feels like it's moving really smooth in there, and I was pretty happy with that. So I'm going to move on to some other mods, and I'll show you those in a bit.